Well, there's no way of knowing. One of the key things about a secret society is that it's secret, and so we don't know what they know. All that we know is that an organisation surfaces in the 1950s, calling itself the Priory of Zion and lodging its statutes with the authorities in Annemasse. So before that registration in the 1950s, we have no certainty about this organisation at all. We only have what the members of this organisation have chosen to tell us.
And what they chose to tell, or rather infer, was that the Priory of Zion was protecting the bloodline of the Merovingian kings. Not only that, but its Grand Master, Pierre Plantard, was himself a descendant of that same bloodline. In France, this is akin to an Englishman claiming to be descended from King Arthur. Except that, of course, the Merovingian kings were an historical reality, not a myth. The claims of a crank, most likely. Except that there were corroborating documents, the dossier secret. Documents that had come to light in the Bibliothèque Nationale, documents showing a line of Grand Masters of the Priory of Zion from the 12th century to the present day. Fake, surely. Except that when researched by Lincoln, Bagent and Lee, it was found that each of the seemingly unrelated names on that list was subtly connected in ways which would require a very deep knowledge of European history for anyone to manufacture. Nothing was ever straightforward, nothing could ever be proven, and yet a trail of tantalizing clues and convoluted pathways pointed to something being protected, something being preserved down through the ages. The need to verify the scenario hinted at by Plantard, the Bibliothèque Nationale documents, the parchments, and indeed the activities of the priest Béranger Saunière, led Lincoln, Bagent and Lee to an extended study of European history. This fresh approach unearthed new discoveries and unexpected connections. Chief amongst these was the suggestion that the Priory of Zion may have been responsible for the creation of that enigmatic order of warrior monks, the Knights Templar. And with any investigation of the Knights Templar, it's hard to avoid dealing with the popular notion of their association with the myth of the Holy Grail.
And in the early Grail stories, the Templars were referred to as the guardians of the Grail and the Grail family. It was the protection of a family which led to the idea of a bloodline, which gave us the dramatic hypothesis of a blood descent from Jesus, and that Jesus, unlike the image we get from him in the Gospels, was in fact married, and that he was married to Mary Magdalene, and she was the Grail. The Grail is, in most of our thinking, a cup or a chalice which supposedly either was used by Jesus at the Last Supper or at the crucifixion, which caught the drops of his blood. But our hypothesis shifted it into another dimension. When we first encounter the Grail in the Grail stories, it's not a holy grail, it's presented as a thing, one word, Sangral, S-A-N-G-R-A-A-L, Sangral. And because there was a word like Graal, which meant cup or chalice, that one word was split into two, Sangral, holy chalice. That's where that idea comes from. But if you break it one letter later, you have sang royal, which is royal blood. And so we have a bloodline, a blood descent. And with the thought of a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the Grail is now the womb of the Magdalene. She bears the blood of Jesus and creates the bloodline of their descent. And so the secret messages that the priest apparently had found began to make sense in a different context. This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king, and to Zion, and he is there dead. Are we talking about a blood descent? Dagobert II, the last effective king of the Merovingian dynasty of France, and were they the blood descendants of Jesus?
In 1982, that suggestion caused an outcry. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, to quote the sleeve notes of a recent edition, sparked off a worldwide storm of controversy, reverberations of which are still resounding throughout the Western world. Over the years, public interest in the subject has remained strong. A steady procession of tourists and treasure hunters still make their way up to the remote hilltop of Rennes-le-Château in search of the truth, enlightenment, or Béranger Saunière's treasure. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail has never been out of print, and countless other books and films on the subject have followed, some sensible, some not so. Debate about the authenticity of the Priory of Zion, to which we will return later, and a possible blood descent from Jesus became inextricably associated with the mystery of Rennes-le-Château.
And we come to 2002, 20 years later, when a thriller is written called the Da+Vinci+Code, which picks up the hypothesis from our book and turns it into a thriller.
Although the first character we meet in Dan Brown's novel, the curator of the Louvre Museum, is named Saunière after the real-life priest of Rennes-le-Château, the village itself doesn't feature in the story. Instead, we're treated to a breathless chase from France to Scotland, visiting 4 major historical locations on the way: the Louvre in Paris, the Temple Church and Westminster Abbey in London, and Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh. All these sites have experienced the benefits and the problems of vastly increased visitor numbers since the publication of the Da Vinci Code. But despite its absence from the novel, Rennes-le-Château has also had its steady stream of tourists turned to a flood as readers realise that the source of the Da Vinci Code theme lies here in the foothills of the Pyrenees. Rennes-le-Château now receives over 100,000 visitors a year. The isolated village community that Henry Lincoln first visited over 30 years ago has changed. In 2004, 5 years after his last visit to Rennes-le-Château, Lincoln saw for himself the effect that the Da Vinci Code phenomenon was having on the village that he made famous.
When I first discovered the story of Rennes-le-Château back in the late 60s, almost nobody had heard of the village, and outside France nobody at all had heard of it. The story just existed as an account of a priest finding a treasure. So when I first stumbled onto it, the village was a little lost, remote peasant hamlet on the top of a mountain, peaceful. Now there's a place to park coaches. There are gift shops, bookshops, postcards, gifts.
Rennes-le-Château is now a managed site. The church is only open at certain times. Visitors can no longer pay homage at the grave of Béranger-Saunière. The cemetery is locked. Saunière's body has been exhumed and transferred to a new memorial in the presbytery garden. You have to pay to get in here. But there is still much to see and to muse over. There's a small museum in the presbytery. You can explore the ground floor of Saunière's Villa Britannia. Walk along the Belvedere and climb his library tower, the Tour Magdala. The spectacular views remain unchanged. People come here for many reasons. But if they're hoping to find the Rennes-le-Château of Béranger-Saunière, they're too late.
And I have to say that I'm not very happy about what's happened, but then my opinion doesn't really matter. But I find it sad to see that it's attracted not just the treasure hunting lunatics, but also people who impose all sorts of other ideas and angles of approach onto what is essentially a story which is much more important than they seem to realize.
Because there is another story to Rennes-le-Château, a story that few of the thousands of visitors are aware of.